7 years ago, when I finished high school, I had big dreams of going to college. I was excited about the idea of learning more, meeting new people, and shaping my future. But life had other plans for me, and my dreams were shattered when the girl I was dating back then got pregnant. I had to make a tough decision. Instead of heading off to a university far away, I decided to enroll in a local community college. This way, I could stay close to home, be there for my girlfriend and our newborn, and still manage to work. It wasn't the ideal situation, but it was what I needed to do at the time. Now, my days are a juggling act. I attend classes in the daytime, trying to absorb as much knowledge as I can. In the evenings, from 3:30 p.m. to 11:30 p.m., I work the second shift at a manufacturing facility. I found a job there as a shipping and receiving staff, and the hours suit my hectic schedule. Before this job, I'd never had a female boss. To be honest, I was a bit apprehensive. Most of my previous bosses were jerks, and there was this stereotype about female bosses having chips on their shoulders. But surprisingly, it turned out to be a refreshing change. She wasn't particularly warm or friendly. In fact, she had what some might call a resting bitch face, making her seem unapproachable. She didn't go out of her way to be nice, but she wasn't mean either. Instead, she had this way of always wanting to prove she was smarter than everyone else, playing word games and challenging ideas. It was the kind of boss where you felt like you had to play along and let her be right all the time. In her mid-40s, she was married with kids in high school. I had never imagined having a female boss like her, but in the end, she wasn't as bad as I thought she'd be. Life had thrown me a curveball, but I was learning to adapt and find silver linings where I could. I got to meet her husband a couple of times during company cookouts, where family members were invited. Our office was relatively small, just 3 of us, but there were 6 forklift drivers and 12 miscellaneous workers under her supervision on the second shift. It was quite a task for her to manage everyone, and she maintained a serious demeanor to keep things in line. Among everyone else, there was one person who never failed to lift her spirits whenever he dropped by our office. He was the safety coordinator for the entire facility, and he had this habit of cruising around on a golf cart. Everyone, including supervisors, was a bit terrified of him because he made sure everyone followed safety protocols. Every week he would rate each supervisor, and those results were visible to the higher-ups in the plant. It wasn't a good look if your score was low, especially for my boss's boss. I began to notice that she was always particularly nice and friendly with him when he visited our office. They would engage in lengthy conversations, and it was obvious that she flirted with him. He was a tall black guy with a commanding presence, and I later found out he had been a collegiate athlete. It dawned on me that her friendliness might be tied to the fact that his evaluations influenced her standing in the company. Perhaps being on good terms with him was strategic for her, ensuring she got favorable scores. It was interesting to observe these dynamics in the workplace, a mix of personal connections, professional responsibilities, and the subtle dance of office politics. Despite his initial intimidating presence, I discovered that the safety coordinator was a genuinely nice guy. If you took the time to get to know him, he'd go above and beyond to help out the supervisors. A few months into the job, our production increased, and so did the demands on the supply chain. Overtime became a regular occurrence. Balancing work and school became even more challenging. I couldn't commit to overtime from Monday to Thursday due to my classes, but Fridays were fair game. One particular Friday, we found ourselves working late into the night. It was just me and my boss, and the clock struck 2 a.m. Eager to get home and see my family, I bolted out of the office, telling my boss I'd see her on Monday. As I hurriedly made my way home, the realization hit me. I had left my phone at the office. Almost reaching home, I made a U-turn and headed back to work. The need to turn around was a minor inconvenience compared to the prospect of being without my phone, especially when I was rushing to reunite with my family. When I arrived back at the office, I rushed in, assuming nobody was around since the lights were off and the door was always open. My boss's office was at the far end, the only cubicle in the room for some privacy. It usually had a neatly organized large desk with shelves and documents. However, what I walked into was a complete mess. Papers were scattered all over the floor, and my boss was struggling to get off her table, only half-clothed, while the safety coordinator was hastily pulling up his pants. In an attempt to diffuse the awkwardness, he cracked a joke, showing he had no idea how to verbally de-escalate the situation. I stood there, shocked and surprised by the unexpected scene. My boss, clearly embarrassed, hurriedly retreated into her cubicle, and I fled the scene as quickly as I had entered. On my way home, I couldn't believe what I had just witnessed. Before I could fully process it, my boss called me. Strangely casual, unlike her usual calls, she asked me to keep what I saw a secret and not tell anyone. She kept apologizing, insisting it was a mistake, even though I didn't really care. It dawned on me that she was probably freaking out. We hadn't known each other for long, and our interactions were strictly professional. She likely didn't know how I'd react, and her apology seemed more about her own anxiety than any concern for my feelings. At that time, I guess my boss was trying to figure out where I stood, testing whether I'd spill the beans. However, being young, I found the whole situation amusing. I didn't consider how her husband might feel. My thoughts were more focused on finding it rather kinky that the safety coordinator was involved in such a situation. Oddly enough, I didn't even mention it to my girlfriend when I got home. I had this idea that if I exposed her, I'd be acting like someone who gossips, and that just didn't sit right with me. When I returned to work on Monday, everything appeared normal. My boss seemed unaffected, except for the fact that she kept glancing at me when she thought I wasn't looking. In the following week, I noticed her warming up to me, becoming more casual in our interactions. I wasn't under any illusion. I knew she was trying to cover her tracks. What she didn't know was that I didn't really care about her personal life. My focus was on going to school and earning enough to take care of my young family. In my position at the time, there were 3 levels of pay increase, typically achieved in 3 years by high-quality employees. Surprisingly, within just 4 months, I had reached that milestone. I understood what was happening. She was using company funds to buy my silence, essentially bribing me with someone else's money. Yet I was content. I was making enough to support my family and enjoying privileges I otherwise wouldn't have had. My priorities were clear, and I was determined to make the most of the opportunities that came my way. Sometimes when I showed up late for work and should have gotten points, my boss would magically remove them. She always let me know when she did this, and even though we never explicitly discussed it, I could sense that she really didn't want anyone to find out. She was making good money at the job, and who knows what consequences could unfold in her marriage if things went south. The safety coordinator, too, kept his distance, understanding the risk of someone else catching wind of their situation and jeopardizing their jobs. The rest of the year unfolded with this unspoken agreement. Around a year later, my boss approached me and mentioned that a position had opened up in another department. It fit my schedule better and came with a higher paycheck. I got the feeling she was subtly trying to push me out, but how could I refuse when I was reaping the benefits? During the time when I submitted my application for the new position, I was immersed in work and school, and I didn't notice that my relationship with my girlfriend was slowly deteriorating. We started becoming like roommates, only crossing paths at night. She didn't voice any complaints, and I didn't suspect anything until an anonymous tip reached me, revealing that my girlfriend was cheating on me with a male co-worker from her job. It turned out there was a love triangle, and the other guy chose my girlfriend, which angered the other woman involved. I assumed it was her who anonymously tipped me off about the affair. When I found out, I was heartbroken and needed some time away from work and school. The sacrifices I was making, I believed, were for the sake of my family. To make matters worse, when I confronted my girlfriend, she seemed lost in the fog of her affair, uncertain about whom she wanted to be with. Realizing she wasn't remorseful and was contemplating staying with the other guy, I reached a breaking point and decided to kick her out of the house. The next day, she came to pick up her things and our son. She told me she was moving in with the other guy. I didn't try to stop her, knowing that our 2-year-old son needed her more than me. We were young, and decisions were made abruptly. One moment I was working hard, going to school, and caring for my family. The next, my girlfriend was gone with our son, living with another man. I was left in an empty apartment with no motivation to continue my education. During that tumultuous period, I kept pondering the reasons for this sudden upheaval. Back then, in my youth, I strongly believed in karma. Instead of considering the possibility that my long hours at work and school had created a physical and emotional distance between me and her, I concluded that it was because I was keeping secrets for my boss. After the dust settled, one thing gnawed at me, making me feel like if I didn't expose my boss, it would haunt me for life. I didn't know if the safety coordinator had a wife or a family, and I didn't bother to find out. However, I was aware that my boss was married since I had met her husband at a cookout. Perhaps out of spite or a sense of self-destruction, I decided to meet up with my boss's husband and tell him about what I had witnessed. The next day, I stupidly showed up to work with an enraged boss. She was furious with me and promptly told me that I was fired. Naturally, I went to HR claiming retaliation, but my boss had already covered her tracks. She had informed HR before firing me, stating that I had lied to her husband about an affair. They didn't bother with an investigation. They simply believed her. Their rationale was that if I had caught my boss and the safety coordinator, I should have gone to HR instead of her husband. If I had done that, they claimed, they would have handled it differently. Losing my job was not the only consequence. I also lost any hope of transferring to a higher-paying position within the company. Something about my girlfriend's infidelity and her lack of remorse set me on a destructive path, leaving me grappling with the fallout of my decisions. During that tumultuous period, my ex-girlfriend decided to add to my pain and suffering by putting me on child support. Faced with this, I had to quickly find a job that clashed with my schedule, and I reluctantly dropped out of school. This mistake cost me almost 2 years of my life. It took that long for me to recover emotionally, find a job that worked with my schedule, and finally enroll back in school. Once I got back on my feet, my ex-girlfriend wanted us to reconcile, but I refused. I had visitation rights, and she did her best to make it challenging for me to see my son. Sometimes she would even try to get the state to increase my child support just to mess with me and putting me at risk with the state. It was a tough period, but I managed to finish my education and find a better job. As for my former boss, I learned that she and her husband eventually got divorced. I'm not sure if it was related to the infidelity. Do I regret my actions? Well, I try not to see it that way. Even now, I'm not sure how I could have handled the situation differently without facing some kind of fallout. My perspective is that everything happens for a reason, and I gained valuable life lessons from that experience that will shape my future.